when he said, "My dad works at NASA." The whole class laughed in his face, but what they didn't know was that in less than 24 hours they'd all be clapping for him. And the person who walked through that classroom door, let's just say he wasn't just any dad. "Yeah, right, and my uncle's Batman." The classroom erupted in laughter. It was one of those Tuesdays that felt like it would never end. The kind of day where even the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual. Mrs. Jackson's 5th grade science class was a mix of sleepy heads and excited chatter. But today, there was a spark in the air. Career Day was just around the corner. The topic had taken over the room. "My mum's a nurse. My dad's a chef at that new Italian place. My aunt's a firefighter, and she slid down the pole once with a dog in her arms." One by one, students stood proudly and announced what their parents did for a living. Some kids boasted, others embellished a little. And then there was Timmy. Timmy wasn't the kind of kid who spoke up often. He was the quiet one who usually sat near the window, staring outside like he was thinking about something a million miles away. He never caused trouble, rarely raised his hand, and often got forgotten in group activities. So when Mrs. Jackson called on him, all eyes turned with half interest and zero expectations. Timmy stood up slowly, fingers nervously gripping the edge of his desk. His voice barely rose above a whisper. He said, "My dad works at NASA." At first there was silence, a moment of confusion. Then the laughter exploded. "Yeah, right, and my uncle's Batman," one kid shouted again. Another giggled. "What's he do? Clean the windows on the space station." A few kids mimed rockets blasting off, making pew-pew sounds. Even a spitball made its way across the room. Timmy just stood there, frozen. His cheeks turned a deep shade of red, but he didn't say a word. Not a single protest. He looked down, quietly sat back in his seat and opened his notebook, trying to disappear behind it. Even Mrs. Jackson had trouble keeping a straight face. She quickly hushed the room, but her raised eyebrows said enough. She didn't believe him either. And who could blame them? Timmy wore hand-me-down clothes. He didn't have the latest sneakers or a flashy lunchbox. He carried a backpack that was held together by duct tape. Kids figured if someone's parent worked at NASA, they'd have a limo and a telescope in their bedroom. Not someone like Timmy. But what they didn't know was that Timmy wasn't lying. Not even close. At home, Timmy's world was completely different. Their house was small and quiet, tucked at the edge of town. But in the backyard stood something magical, an old telescope mounted on a custom-built platform, aimed at the stars. His dad had built it himself. Dr. Samuel Hayes, Timmy's father, was an aerospace engineer working at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was one of the minds behind deep space propulsion systems. His days were filled with blueprints, simulations, and communications with people who literally worked beyond Earth. But you wouldn't know it by looking at him. Dr. Hayes wore jeans and old t-shirts. He drove a modest car and spent his evenings helping Timmy build model rockets or explaining how gravity slingshots worked using tennis balls and string. He wasn't flashy. He didn't brag. He believed in doing meaningful work without needing applause for it. And that's exactly what he taught Timmy too. "You don't need to shout to be right," he'd always say. "Truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs time." Back at school the laughter faded, but the whispers didn't. Kids kept teasing Timmy about his space dad, calling him Rocket Boy and asking if he lived on the moon. Timmy never reacted. He just kept sketching rockets in his notebook and watching the sky during recess. What none of them knew was that Timmy had already asked his dad, quietly, nervously, if he could come to Career Day. His father had just smiled, nodded, and said, "I'll be there." The class wouldn't believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. But when that moment came, when that classroom door finally opened on Career Day, everything would change, and every single kid who had laughed would fall completely silent. Because sometimes the biggest surprises come from the quietest kids, and sometimes the truth really is out of this world. Timmy had always been the quiet kid. Not the kind of quiet that's shy or scared, but the kind that seems like he's always somewhere else, thinking about something bigger. While most fifth graders were obsessed with video games or the latest viral dance trend, Timmy was different. He didn't wear the flashiest shoes or bring cool new gadgets to class. His backpack had seen better days, and his lunch was usually something simple, packed in reusable containers. No one ever fought to sit next to him at lunch. He wasn't unpopular, just invisible. The kind of kid people overlooked until they needed help with their science homework. Timmy spent most recesses sitting under the big oak tree at the edge of the playground. While other kids played tag or traded cards, he'd pull out a spiral notebook and start sketching. Rockets, satellites, planets, pages and pages filled with doodles of space missions. It wasn't just a hobby. It was something deeper, something he lived for. Of course, not everyone appreciated his passion. Some kids teased him, calling him names like Rocket Boy or Timmy Telescope. They'd make swooshing sounds and pretend to launch off into space whenever he walked by. A few even mocked his old sneakers, saying they looked like moon boots. But Timmy never fought back. He never told on anyone or caused a scene. He'd just give a tiny smile, maybe shrug, and go back to his drawings. It wasn't that he didn't care. It's that he knew something they didn't. Because at home, everything changed. Timmy's world came alive the moment he stepped through his front door. Their house was small, nothing fancy. But what made it magical was the backyard. In the middle of the lawn stood a homemade telescope that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. It was big, bold, and aimed permanently at the stars. His dad, Dr. Samuel Hayes, had built it with his own hands. Dr. Hayes wasn't like the dads you saw in commercials. He didn't wear suits or carry a briefcase. He wore t-shirts with galaxy prints and jeans with grease stains. His hands were calloused from working with machines, and his mind was filled with ideas that stretched far beyond Earth. He worked as an aerospace engineer at NASA, specifically in propulsion systems for deep space missions. That meant he spent his days solving problems most people couldn't even imagine, like how to push a spacecraft across millions of miles of vacuum using just gravity and fuel nozzles. But at night, he was just Dad. He'd sit with Timmy under the stars, explaining how planets aligned and how the moon's gravity affected the ocean. He told stories, real ones, about missions to Mars, satellites orbiting Jupiter, and telescopes that could see galaxies millions of light years away. Sometimes they'd lie on the trampoline in the backyard, staring up at the night sky in silence. To Timmy, his dad wasn't just a scientist. He was a real-life space hero. But Timmy never bragged about it. He could have walked into class and said, "My dad helps launch rockets for NASA." He could have told stories that made every jaw in the room drop. But that wasn't Timmy's style. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just loved space. And he loved his dad. The only time he ever mentioned it in school was when Mrs. Jackson asked about their parents' jobs. He wasn't trying to stand out. He just answered honestly. But honesty, as he learned, didn't always earn applause. When he said, "My dad works at NASA," it didn't come with wide eyes or amazed gasps. It came with laughter. It came with disbelief. It came with rolled eyes and jokes. Still, Timmy didn't push back. He just nodded and let them laugh. But deep down, he hoped for a moment, just one, where they'd see what he saw. A moment where his world would finally make sense to them. And that moment was coming. Career Day was around the corner, and the classroom was buzzing with excitement. Mrs. Jackson had already lined up speakers, a firefighter, a chef, a dentist, and someone's aunt who worked at a local bank. Each student had submitted a name of someone they wanted to bring in. Timmy hadn't said anything out loud, but the night before the list was finalized, he quietly approached Mrs. Jackson's desk. He handed her a piece of paper and said softly, "My dad might be able to come?" She took the paper without thinking much of it. She probably assumed it was another made-up story or an attempt to join in after the teasing. What she didn't realize was that name on the paper wasn't fiction. It was Dr. Samuel Hayes, a real NASA engineer, a man who helped design technology that would one day take humans to Mars. And he was coming, not just to prove a point, but to show a classroom full of kids that sometimes the quietest voice has the most incredible story to tell. The moment everything changed. The big day finally arrived. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Posters of planets and rockets decorated the walls. A little table in the corner was stacked with juice boxes and chocolate chip cookies, and chairs had been rearranged to make space for the guest speakers. Career Day was one of the most anticipated days of the year. Not because it gave the kids a break from math homework, but because it made their parents feel like superheroes. The first few speakers set the tone. A tall, broad-shouldered police officer talked about courage and keeping communities safe. He passed around plastic badges, and the kids lit up with excitement. Next came a kind-faced nurse who spoke about caring for patients and how she once helped deliver a baby in a stuck elevator. The class gasped in all the right places. Then came a software developer. He had slides, diagrams, and lots of big words, none of which made much sense to a room full of 10-year-olds. Still, the kids were polite and clapped along. As each parent finished, Mrs. Jackson thanked them warmly, handing out little gift bags with student-drawn thank you cards. Then she checked her clipboard. "And that concludes today's—" She paused mid-sentence, squinting at the last name. "Oh, it seems we have one more guest, Dr. Samuel Hayes." A ripple of confusion swept through the classroom. Timmy's head snapped up. His heart thudded so hard he could barely breathe. He looked around the room. No one else was moving. He sat up straighter, hands folded tightly in his lap, a flicker of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Jackson blinked. "Is Dr. Hayes here?" The classroom door opened with a soft click, and in walked a man who changed everything. He was tall, really tall, with broad shoulders and a calm, confident stride. He wore a deep blue jumpsuit with the NASA logo stitched over the chest, and an American flag patch on one shoulder. Silver-rimmed glasses framed his focused eyes, and his expression was kind but sharp, like someone used to making big decisions that affected millions. The room went still. The air seemed to thicken with surprise. A few jaws dropped. One student gasped audibly. Even Mrs. Jackson stood frozen for a moment, clutching her clipboard like it might float away. Dr. Hayes gave a small, warm smile. "Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Hayes, and I work at NASA. I help design propulsion systems for deep space missions, so basically I help rockets go really, really far." There was a beat of silence. Pure, stunned silence. Then chaos. Hands shot into the air. "Do you know astronauts? Have you been to space? Can you make a rocket out of soda bottles? Do aliens exist?" Dr. Hayes chuckled and held up a hand. "One at a time. I promise I'll answer as many as I can." He turned to Mrs. Jackson and nodded. "Is it all right if I set something up?" Still slightly dazed, she stepped aside. Yes, of course." He placed a small tablet on the desk and connected it to the projector. Instantly, the screen filled with high-definition images. The Mars rover crawling over red dunes, a space capsule docking with the International Space Station, engineers floating in zero-gravity chambers. "I'm part of the team that helps build and test engines that power missions like these," he said. "It's not always glamorous, and I don't fly the rockets, but I make sure they fly safely and far." The kids were captivated. Some leaned so far forward in their chairs they nearly toppled. Others scribbled frantically in their notebooks. No one blinked. No one whispered. No one laughed. Then, the moment that sealed everything. Dr. Hayes clicked to the next slide. A photo of him and Timmy, standing side by side next to a life-sized model of a spacecraft. Timmy was smiling from ear to ear, wearing a child-sized NASA cap, and holding a model rocket. "That's my son," Dr. Hayes said, glancing across the room. "Some of you might know him as Timmy. He's my inspiration, and probably knows more about the moons of Jupiter than I do." All eyes turned toward Timmy, but this time no one was laughing. No jokes, no smirks, just wide eyes and a new kind of respect. Timmy smiled softly, still sitting straight, but now with a quiet pride he didn't try to hide. Mrs. Jackson stepped forward, her voice a little shaky. "Dr. Hayes, thank you. That was incredible." "My pleasure," he replied. Then he looked at the class. "Keep dreaming big, even if people laugh, especially if they laugh, because one day you just might surprise them." And in that moment, a quiet kid named Timmy wasn't so invisible anymore. He was the boy whose dad really did work at NASA. And this time, the truth spoke for itself. The truth that changed everything. Dr. Hayes didn't talk like the other parents. He didn't try to sound impressive. He didn't rattle off degrees or throw around complex terminology. Instead, he did something rare. He made every single person in that classroom feel something. He began not with equations, but with stories. He told them about how a spacecraft can travel millions of miles, not by brute force, but by using the gravity of planets like slingshots, hurling it forward with astonishing precision. He explained how astronauts train underwater, in massive tanks to simulate zero gravity, spending months preparing for the chance to spend just a few hours floating outside the International Space Station. "But space," he said, his voice calm and steady, "isn't just about rockets and astronauts. It's about curiosity. It's about asking questions and then chasing the answers, even if they're light years away." The class was silent. No fidgeting, no whispers. Just eyes locked on him, absorbing every word. Then he reached into a small case and pulled out something unexpected, a small, jagged, grey-black rock. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a real meteorite." It fell to Earth in Argentina, and it's believed to be more than 4 billion years old, older than any mountain, any tree, even the Earth itself. Gasps filled the room. Carefully he walked from desk to desk, letting each student hold it, just for a moment. The once rowdy kids who used to toss erasers across the room now handled the meteorite like it was sacred. Even Mrs. Jackson, standing near the board, looked as if someone had flipped a switch inside her. The skepticism that once danced in her eyes was gone, replaced by awe. And then the moment came. Dr. Hayes clicked to the final slide on the screen behind him. It was a photo of him and a young boy standing in front of a life-size Mars rover replica. The boy was wearing a NASA baseball cap, 2 sizes too big, holding a model rocket in one hand and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "That's me, Doctor," Hayes said with a chuckle. "And this guy right here," he turned toward the class, then back to the photo, "is my favorite astronaut in training." He paused, letting the moment sink in. "And that is my son, Timmy." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The classroom fell into the kind of silence that only comes with total surprise. You could have heard a pin drop. Then slowly, almost cautiously, heads turned. Dozens of eyes scanned the room until they landed on Timmy, sitting in the 3rd row, just 2 seats from the back. He wasn't hiding this time. He wasn't slouching behind his notebook or pretending not to notice. He sat tall, not proud in a boastful way, but proud in a quiet, powerful way. His eyes gleamed, not with revenge, but with validation. The boy they used to call Rocket Boy, the one they laughed at, the one they never believed, was now the son of a NASA scientist who had just held an entire room in the palm of his hand. Then, one by one, hands started clapping. A ripple of applause spread through the classroom, growing louder, stronger, until the entire room was cheering. Kids who had once rolled their eyes at Timmy were now looking at him like he was the coolest kid in school. Mrs. Jackson wiped the corner of her eye and joined in the applause. Timmy glanced at his dad. Dr. Hayes gave him a wink. The kind of fatherly wink that said, "I told you they'd see it one day." After the applause settled, a few brave students raised their hands. "Timmy, do you help your dad with rocket stuff? What's it like to use that telescope in your backyard? Can you show us how to draw those cool rockets you make?" Timmy answered each question, one after another. His voice was soft, but confident. This was his moment, and he wasn't afraid anymore. Later that day, as the bell rang and kids poured into the hallway, something had changed. The whispers were different now. They weren't jokes, they were questions. "Did you know Timmy's dad really works at NASA? He brought a real meteorite. Timmy should totally start a space club." And for the first time in a long time, Timmy wasn't walking home alone. 3 kids walked beside him, peppering him with questions. He smiled, answered a few, and saved the rest for tomorrow, because now they were listening. And all it took was one quiet truth, one incredible dad, and one unforgettable day, for the whole world to finally see the kid who had always been looking up. When truth speaks louder than laughter. After that day, everything changed. The teasing stopped almost overnight. The whispers that used to follow Timmy down the hallway turned into waves and greetings. No more snide jokes, no more rolled eyes, no more calling him Timmy Telescope like it was an insult. Something had shifted. Now kids approached him with curiosity instead of sarcasm. "Hey Timmy, is it true that stars are actually giant balls of gas? Can you help me with my science fair project? What's the name of that moon on Saturn again? The one with the ocean under the surface?" Timmy, who used to sit alone during lunch, now had a group around him, wide-eyed kids hanging on to every word. He'd bring his space books to school, sometimes even print out photos from NASA's website. And whenever the sky was clear, he'd invite classmates over to look through the backyard telescope his dad helped him build. He became more than the kid with a smart dad. He became someone that others respected, looked up to, and even admired. But the real victory wasn't in the popularity or the praise. It was in the way Timmy carried himself. He never gloated, never said, "I told you so." He didn't use the new attention to get even with the kids who once laughed at him. Instead, he stayed exactly who he'd always been, curious, kind, and a little bit quiet. And that's what made it all the more powerful, because respect earned through humility and truth lasts longer than any applause. Even Mrs. Jackson treated him differently. She started calling on him more in class, not just when she had to, but because she knew he had something worth hearing. One day, she even asked him to help plan a space-themed bulletin board for the hallway. Timmy smiled, not because he needed the validation, but because finally his voice mattered. At home, Dr. Hayes noticed the change too. He didn't say much about it. He didn't have to. Every now and then, he'd give Timmy a look, one of quiet pride, and that was enough. One evening, after the stars came out, Timmy and his dad sat under the telescope, adjusting the lenses and talking about the next meteor shower. "You handled everything with grace, Tim," his dad said. "You didn't try to prove anything. You just let the truth speak." Timmy looked through the eyepiece at a tiny glowing dot in the sky. "It took a while," he said, "but I guess people needed to see it." His dad smiled. Most truths work that way. From that day forward, Timmy carried a confidence that couldn't be faked. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need validation. It was the kind of confidence that grows from knowing who you are, even when the world doesn't believe you yet. Moral of the story: never judge someone by what you think you know about them. The quiet kid, the awkward one, the one with strange hobbies or unusual dreams. They might just be someone incredible waiting to be seen. Because sometimes truth takes its time. It doesn't always come with fanfare. It doesn't always shout or argue. It just waits for the right moment, when words aren't needed and actions speak for themselves. And when that moment comes, the truth doesn't just prove people wrong, it changes everything. So be kind, be curious, and most of all, be patient. Because one day, the kid who got laughed at might walk in with a meteorite, a story, and a NASA badge. And suddenly, you'll realize they weren't pretending after all. They were just waiting for you to catch up. And that is the power of truth, character, and a father in a NASA jumpsuit. And that, my friend, is how one quiet kid and one unexpected guest turned laughter into applause. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you to never judge a book by its cover, then imagine how many more stories like this are out there, waiting to be told. So if you love powerful, true-to-life stories that inspire, surprise, and maybe even give you goosebumps, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Because the next story might just change your perspective too. Subscribe now, and let's keep bringing the truth to light, one story at a time.